In today's day and age, being a landlord seems like it's a dirty word. In fact, more and more people are coming out today believing that property is a right, property should be given out for free, and being a landlord is actually a negative thing in society. Now, today I'm going to explain why that view is fundamentally toxic and actually does more harm than good throughout society. Now, here is the point. Landlords will always be the wealthiest people throughout society. I'm going to say that again. Landlords will always be the wealthiest people. Now, I'm Cory Jones, owner and founder of Motivate Property Group, and I help my clients become landlords, professional landlords, ones that actually solve the housing shortage problem and make themselves wealthy. Now, I'm going to explain to you today why this is the case and why this will never actually change. Now, landlords are always the first to be paid in society. Now, they get paid before anything's actually even produced in an economy. That means that your hairbrush, your car, your house, everything that you own, a landlord somewhere on the planet has made a profit from you. That might hurt. In fact, it may go and hurt more than actually being a landlord itself, but I'll leave that to you. Now, what I'm essentially referring to today is the Ricardian law, otherwise known as Ricardo's law of economic rent. Now, this is a podcast that I'm doing after one of the last podcasts I did a couple of weeks ago. My team has actually asked me to do a whole episode on this and explain to you, our listeners, as to why landlords will always be the wealthiest people throughout society. In fact, it's almost impossible for them not to be. Now, the way to think about it, guys, in society, there are 4 factors of production. Now, the 4 factors of production are the 4 things that goes into play in the economy that produces some form of good or asset. These 4 factors are 4 things that are generally required in most businesses in order for that business to actually make money and profit, and in turn, improve land values in the surrounding society. Now, the 4 factors of production, number 1 is land availability. So today I'm doing this podcast from our office in Balcutta, all right, the Motivate Property Podcast. Now, the fact of the matter is I am standing in a building that is owned by a landlord, a commercial property owner, and I'm paying him rent. Now, while we can run our business online and a lot of our staff work from home, I work from home mostly, the reality is we do still need a premise in order to operate our business. So the first thing that we need to operate our business is land in the building and that land. The second factor of production is labor. In order for us to fulfill our service, we need workers. We need staff, we need receptionists, we need salespeople, we need marketers, we need finance team, we need property managers, we need real estate agents. We need a bunch of different things. We need a bunch of different people to come together and work as a team in order to provide that product or service to our clients. The third factor is capital. We physically need capital to put into the business and buy equipment, buy tools, buy paper, buy desks, buy computer screens, buy software. All of these different things that I've personally invested as the owner and founder of the company in order to then provide that product or service to you. The fourth is enterprise. Now, enterprise really speaks to the entrepreneur or the business owner, the risk taker, the innovator, the one who's put the land, the labor, and the capital all together and made it all work like a perfect, efficient, well-oiled machine. Now, the reality is, guys, each one of these, between land, labor, capital, and enterprise or entrepreneurship, it requires some form of investment. Now, if, for example, we don't have the land, we go and rent the land from a private landlord. If we don't have enough labor, we've got to go and put money and spend money on salaries and invest in salaries. If we don't have the right capital, we've physically got to put money into the business to go and buy laptops and calculators and all sorts of different equipment we need to provide our service. Otherwise, as the innovator or the entrepreneur or the risk taker, I've got to go and take a risk and assume this is all going to work and put it all together and essentially try and force it to work. Now, when you invest in one of these 4, that is why you actually end up making money. In other words, the more money I put into one, the more money gets spit out the other side. Now, most people don't operate with land at the forefront. The reason why I say land is actually the most important is for a couple of reasons. Now, when most people think about a business, they think about mainly labor and capital, all right? And them being the business owner, them being the entrepreneur, that box is ticked and they don't have to pay attention to the enterprise. I would say it's a little naive. But the one factor that most people always forget is land, the cost of land and the value of land. Now, when you realize the productive gains of society always funnel back into the land value, you'll then realize why landlords will always be the wealthiest people throughout society. In other words, the productive gains of society goes back to the landlord. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say today you buy a property in Balcutta, where I'm standing or sitting. Now, in Balcutta, there's a shopping center, there's a commercial precinct, There's all these houses around. There is bus stops and pubs and cafes and all sorts of great stuff here in Balcatta. Now, the reality is the productive gains of the people in Balcatta have spent all of that money putting all of that infrastructure into Balcatta. Now, if I come and buy a property today, I'm buying it, let's just say for $1 million, and that $1 million price has already reflected all of that infrastructure into my price. In other words, I'm buying it once the productive gains have already made that market. Now, let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say instead of buying in Balcatta today, you bought it 60 years ago when there was nothing here. If you were the first person to buy in Balcatta and all you owned was land and nothing else, the fact that developers came in and bought some land to build houses, commercial precinct came in and they bought commercial buildings and built commercial buildings. They built pubs, they built a shopping centre, they built a cafe strip, they built all these great things that are now in Balcatta. It's the productive gains of everyone else's investment has turned my really cheap block that no one wanted because there was nothing here that's now worth millions and millions of dollars. So the way to think about it, guys, the productive gains of society, when everyone else comes in and spends lots of money into an area and they're the ones who are taking the risk, they're the ones who are making the investments, that's actually making me wealthy as the landlord. So that's the first aspect to the Ricardian law. The second aspect to the Ricardian law is when you pay your rent, when do you pay it? You generally pay it first. So when people get paid, first thing that comes out is the cost of the real estate, the cost of the land, the cost of the house, the cost of the rent, whatever it is. Now, the point of the story is, if I'm running a business, and it doesn't matter how much money that I'm actually making, because if I don't make a profit, I'm not making a profit after I've already paid the landlord, because the profit comes after the landlord. In other words, the landlord gets paid first. We make our money, I pay the business rent, I pay wages, I pay for the capital, pay for labor, pay for this, pay for that, and all of a sudden, at the very end of it, I'm left with my money. Because the land was paid first, the landlord was paid first. So no matter what my business does, no matter what my business generates, the landlord's always the first payment. Now, this also goes the same case is when you buy a house or buy a property. When you get paid, your mortgage comes out first. Why? Because that's the friggin' shelter. You got to pay for the shelter, otherwise you don't have a business. So that is the second aspect as to why landlords will always be the wealthiest in terms of the Ricardian law, because they always get paid first. Now, the third aspect is when I'm out here selling property or selling finance or selling property management or selling developments, that is physically how our business generates a profit or generates a revenue. Now, the point of the story is there is an argument to say that if our business does really well, we get to pay the landlord and we get to stay here for a long time. And we can't afford to maintain the cost of the land. We've then got to close up shop, give this property back to the landlord, and then he loses and I lose and our clients lose. So there is an argument to be made that technically my landlord that I rent this commercial property from, he is actually making his money in property because that's what we sell, and we make our money in property in order to pay his rent. So if you own a commercial premise and that commercial premise is a very obscure niche business that doesn't generate a profit, the point is as a landlord, you're the one who's technically holding up that business and that business viability. So if you've got a very terrible business that rents from you, you're probably not going to make that much money as a landlord because they're going to go bankrupt and you have to boot them and find somebody else. So there is also an argument under the Ricardo's law of economic rent that whatever business is operating inside of your premise, you're technically making your money in that industry. And then the fourth and final example I'll give you guys is the cost of real estate. So let's do a quick example. I'm going to use 2 suburbs in Perth. For those who know Perth, or who don't know Perth, just jump on a map. All right. But the first example is starting up a barber shop in the suburb of Armadale. Now, the reason why I use Armadale, guys, it is in the fringes. It's a low socioeconomical activity area, low demographics. Generally speaking, there are obviously some really good people there, but yeah, lots of crime. Generally not a nice suburb overall. Now, when I say that, I'm saying that in context to the rest of the Perth metro area. All right. I'm sure everyone in Armadale is very, a lot nicer than, people in other war-torn countries, let's say. I'll leave it there. Now, the point of the story is, if I went to go and open up a barber shop in Armadale, all right, it's going to cost me money. I've got to rent the lease, I've got to go find some people, get some chairs, get the equipment, and I can go and set up my barber shop in Armadale, cheap area. Now, if I want to go and start up a barber shop in, say, Cottesloe, premium area, median house price $3 million plus, on the beach, considered probably one of the most affluent suburbs in Perth, am I charging more money? Well, of course I am, because it's in Cottesloe. So the way to think about it, guys, if I was to open up a barber shop in a really bad area versus a really good area, what's different? Think about labour. I would pay people, the barbers in Armadale, the same as I'd pay in Cottesloe. Why? Because they're in the same state, they're doing the same job. One can kind of go from one to the other without really much of a problem. You can swap them out, and that's what the going rate for that particular job in our state is. So you essentially offer a role or an income based on what the median income is. So whether it's in Armadale, whether it's in Cottesloe, I'm paying the barbers the same amount of money. Now, whether it's in Armadale or it's in Cottesloe, the chairs cost the same, the clippers cost the same, the scissors cost the same, all the equipment, all the capital, all the signs cost the same amount of money as if I was in Armadale or I was in Cottesloe. For me as an entrepreneur, it doesn't really make much difference if I'm putting my labour and capital together in Armadale or if I'm putting it together in Cottesloe. It costs me the same amount, and it costs me the same amount of energy. The only thing that is different comparing Armadale to Cottesloe is the cost of the land. So the way to think about it, the cost of the land in Cottesloe essentially demands a higher price to get your hair cut because the land is 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 times more expensive. So the reality is, if I can buy in a nicer or bigger or better or a more valuable area, I can essentially charge more money to conduct that service than if I had the exact same business in a cheaper area. And all this is essentially doing is confirming the point that the productive gains of society, all the money that society makes, all of the wins, all of the value that society provides, always ends up funneling into the landlord's pocket. So whether we like it or not, the landlords will always be the wealthiest in society, and the landlords always have been the wealthiest in society. Now, what does this mean for you? Firstly, think like a landlord. Be a landlord. If you can think and be a landlord, you're actually going to make a lot more money than all the other people around you who aren't. Now, this is where the game Monopoly comes in. How do you win Monopoly? You win by having the most houses, in fact, by having the most hotels. The faster that you can become the landlord, the faster that you're the one who's gaining the productive gains from society. The more money that people are spending around you, when they start building new schools and hospitals and train stations and more houses, and you already own there, all of the money that they're investing into this area is actually making your house worth more, your asset worth more, and is actually making you a lot wealthier over time. That, guys, is why landlords will always be the wealthiest people throughout society.